Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to this game tutorial. So in this one, we actually create some kind of combat floating text. So you can barely see it right now, but as you can tell, there is some little numbers popping up whenever I do damage to an enemy. Now if I crank up my damage, you're gonna see different numbers, and that's pretty much our floating combat text right there. So guys, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so the last two episodes were actually quite easy, so we're gonna have a rough one today. We are going to start by creating a new C# script. And this one is going to be something I like to call the Combat Text Manager. Now, I've came up with this on the other tutorial, and it's pretty much the same exact script, but it's working just fine, and I'd like to actually implement it here. This was done in the tower defense tutorial. So, we will start and just implement some things we need. So let's start with using Unity Engine.ui because we're going to be using some text types. So the next one is using system.collection.generic so we can have some list. Okay. Now what we'd like this thing to do is we'd like it to actually pop some kind of, well actually first instantiate some kind of image that has a text on it and we can see it. So some kind of floating combat text. If you guys played MMOs, they usually have that. So whenever you do like a big hit, it actually pops a number above the minion's head and then you know how much damage you've done. So in order to do that, the way I'd like to implement it is I actually have another class up here that I put in the same file, the actual same script file, but they're pretty much just only used here. So I call it combat text. So public class combat text does not inherit from anything. We don't need it to have any kind of overhead. And it has a few properties in it. So let's do the first one. Is active. It's boolean. So public bool is active. Public game object, because this is going to be attached to an actual game object in the scene. And then public text, that's the text component we're going to be modifying and just inputting the amount of damage we deal. And finally, vector3, well not finally, but a public vector3 motion in case we want this text to be moving a little bit while we, well, as soon as it's found, it can have an actual motion. So it can go up, it can go down, can go left, right, and all that kind of stuff. The next one is a public float duration, and the last one is a public float last show. Okay, so these are all the property of the little text object we're going to be spawning, and that's pretty much it. So it's going to have a few other functions inside of it. The first one is a public void show, which we are not going to fill in just yet. The next one is a public void hide, and the last one is a public void update combat text, which is basically just like an update. It's going to be the exact same thing as an actual update, but since we don't inherit from model behavior, then it wouldn't actually be called. So yeah, here it is. Okay, so let's quickly fill in the body of all these nice functions. In the show, we'd like to say is active is equal to true. Last shown is equal to time.time, and go.setActive is equal to true. In the hide, all we're going to be saying is active is equal to false, and go.setActive is also going false. So far, so good. So when we hit show, we toggle on a boolean and we just say, okay, so your game object, turn it on right now. And when we hit hide, same thing, but in reverse. Now, as far as the combat text, here is where it gets a little bit complicated. So we're going to say if is active, so let's start with that. So if you are not active, return. So basically you're just going to be entering this function and you are going to go back if there's nothing going on. Now if time.time minus last shown is bigger than duration, that means you actually went above the time that you should be on the scene right now. So you've been active for say 1 second and the duration is 0.75. So that means, okay, you're ready to actually hide. And that's all good. But now, so you're hiding, blah, okay, so in case you are still running right now, in case your combat text is still active, then we're going to say geo.transform.position is plus equal to the motion we gave you times time.delta time. Now that's all cool. Let's do the next one. So geo.transform.rotation is equal to quaternion.look rotation, and we're going to be looking at the actual camera. So you guys know in some games you have some kind of trees in the background, and when you move your camera around them, they still look the same. They're actually like a still image. That is what we call a billboard image, and we are actually going to reproduce this kind of effect using these little combat text. So I always want the combat text to be facing my camera. Whichever angle I'm actually looking at, we know it's a plane. In 3D it's a plane, but I'd like to actually have it looking at the camera all the time. So what I'm going to say is the rotation of that object is equal to quaternion.look rotation, and then we're going to do geo.transform.position minus camera.main.transform.position. And this way it is always going to be looking at me. Alright, so we did the whole combat text class. Now we're going to be finding a way to easily call this from outside and actually have it work. So since I want this to be easily accessible from outside, I'm going to create an instance of it. So public static combat text manager that I call instance. Alright, so far so good. Let's go into start and actually assign that. So private void start instance is equal to this. Okay, so what else could we actually be putting in that? I don't think we need anything else in the actual start. Let's go ahead and declare where exactly we're going to be having all those little text container. So public game object combat text container, and then public game object combat text prefab, and we can actually start spawning those now. Now the only problem we actually have here is, just imagine you have like one projectile that does AoE damage and you're actually say hitting 8 enemy at the same exact time. Then in that case you want to be popping 8 little combat texts in your map. And now since we're using a prefab, I'm actually planning on instantiating those. Since we are on mobile, doing 8 instantiate at the same time is going to be really costly, and we might actually get some kind of flag spike. So in that case, we need to actually find another solution. We must not always be instantiating those things. And that is why we're going to be using what we call a pool. Now a pool is not really a complicated concept. It basically means that if you're going to be using an object, don't delete it when you're done with it. So as you can tell in our combat text class, when we do a hide, we don't actually delete the object. We don't do a delete this object. We only do a set active to false. This way, that means we can reuse it later on. If we grab a instance of that combat text, we can go ahead and reuse this object later on. We're going to be turning it on and just moving it somewhere, then changing the text. And that's pretty much what the pools mean. That means you don't really destroy your thing, you just reuse them all the time. So you actually recycle your object. And this way you don't have to instantiate them all the time, and you don't get to deal with these lag spike. The way I actually do that is I create a private class in here, not class, a private function that returns a combat text, and I'm going to call it get combat text. Now what is going to happen is we have this list. Well, we don't have the list, but we are going to have an actual list, and every time we instantiate a new combat text, we're going to be adding that combat text to the list. So let's start by creating that list. So private list combat text. That way you're gonna be calling this combat text with an S is equal to a new list of combat text. Okay. Now whenever we have to get one, we're gonna start by declaring a combat text like so. CMB is equal to combat text dot find. So we're going to be looking through our existing array and you're going to be returning the first one that is not active. So C, and this is a lambda function, so you're going to be writing it this way, C dot is active. So now if we find an object that is not active inside of our list, this is the object we're going to have. So we're simply going to take this combat text object. But just say that they're all being used right now. In that case, you don't have the choice to actually instantiate one. So if combat is equal to null, that means there is no object currently inactive right now, so we're going to be using a new one. We're simply going to say CMB is equal to a new combat text. Oops. And then let's actually set some properties. So cmb.go is equal to instantiate, and we instantiate a combat text prefab. Then after that we do cmb.go .transform .setParent, and we are going to be setting this to the combat text container .transform. And finally, cmb.txt is equal to cmb.go.getComponent text. And that is why we don't want to be redoing this operation every time. Oh, here. Instantiate. Because as you can tell, all those calls are pretty expensive, so we only need to do them like few times at the beginning of the scene, and then we don't have to redo them at all. And finally, let's add it to the list. So combat text.add cmb. Once we're done with all of that stuff, we can go ahead and actually return whichever object we got. So if we got an existing one, it's going to return that one. And if we had to create it, well, we assign it down here as well. Okay, so that's made. Everything looks great. Now we only need some kind of way to actually call this. So from outside, we are going to make a public void that we're going to be calling show. Now show is going to be the function you actually want to access from other places. So this is the big function that is going to say, let's go ahead and just spawn me an object here. Here's the size, here's the color, here's the position, the motion, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be shooting all of that in parameters. So let's start with the first one, string text. Let's do int font size, in case we want to get funky and like actually change the font size of our messages. Then a color. What else? The position, vector3 position, really important. And then we're going to be doing the motion, so vector3 dot motion. And finally, we are going to say float duration. Okay, so having all of these parameters now, we can actually go ahead and just say combat text cmb. Now grab me a new one, so get combat text. Get combat text. We call the function. Then we can say cmb.text .text is equal to text, which is the one we get in parameter. Now next one, cmb.text.fontSize is equal to font size. Again, the one we get in parameter. And finally, cmb.text.color is equal to color. So we got all of these. Now let's actually set the position. So cmb.go.transform.position is equal to position. And what else do we need? Oh, the motion. So cmb.motion is equal to motion. And finally, cmb.duration is equal to duration. Once we're done doing this, we can actually say cmb.show. And show is going to be handling the whole toggling on and just the rest of the logic. So the only thing we really need now is whenever the object is actually active, we call the update combat text. Now, how exactly are we going to hook up to the update function if we don't inherit from auto behavior? That is fairly simple. We've made this function over here public, so all we're going to be saying is actually inside of our combat text manager, we can go ahead and just say private void update, and for every single one of those, so for each combat text, let's call it CMB in combat text with an S, we can actually say cmb.update combat text. Now this way, every single frame, it is going to call every single update on every single combat text. And that seems really complicated, all we've done, because we haven't tested it out yet. But we're actually going to have a look at this in the game just to try it out. So if we go over here, in our preloader, we hit play. We don't have it anywhere, so where exactly could we be putting this? We are going to be putting this in the take damage function for the enemy, I think. So let's actually find our enemies. Here they are. And inside of that script, there is the take damage about here. So on the take damage function, we are going to say combat text manager dot show dot instance dot show. And now let's show the amount to string. The font size, we can be making it like 32. Color dot yellow. The position is the position of this very enemy, so transform that position. The motion, let's do a vector3 dot up times like 3. And we can leave this on for say 0.5 second. So with this big call, we should actually get some kind of combat text going on, but beforehand we actually need to put this somewhere on our scene. So if we go over to the game scene, on the game UI, I will go ahead and just drag and drop my combat text manager. And this one is actually going to need a few things. Well, of course, the combat text container and then the combat text prefab. Okay, so in order to do this, we are going to need another canvas because this one is pretty much only in 2D, so it does the screen space overlay, and that's perfectly fine for what we need. However, for the 3D combat text, we actually needed to be spawning at like the enemy's position, and that's in 3D. We can't just be putting like a sprite on top of it or something like that. We actually need to spawn it at the actual 3D space. And in order to do that, we are going to need another canvas. Let's start by renaming this one 2D UI, and then we can go ahead and right click here, create a new canvas, and this is the 3D UI. Okay, I'm just going to put it down here, and that is also going to act as the container. So I just put this one in world space. I'm just going to put all the values on 0 so I don't actually see it. And here it is. So this is now my combat text container. I'm going to go over to the game UI, drag and drop this in my container. But now we still need the actual prefab. And that thing is a little bit hard to make, so just tag along and look closely. I am going to right click on my game UI, find a text, try to zoom in on it a little bit so I can actually see. Here it is. And here is what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be putting the position on 0, like that. I'd put the width on like 100 in both. Now, under the text, we actually set font size 32, and that looks good. It is also going to be a line in the center, like so. The color is going to be yellow. So right now, this is what it should actually look like. But in 3D space, it actually looks way too big. So what we'll actually need to do is say this scale, put it on something like 0.05 on all the axes, and this is what you actually end up with, which is a little bit better. And maybe even 0.25, like so. I mean 0.025. And also make sure that this is in bold, because why not? Good times. And once this is done, I'm just going to move it back to the position 0 and then drag and drop this inside of the prefab folder. Remove it from my actual scene. Also rename this to combat text. And I can just go ahead and just put it inside of my combat text prefab. And now, hopefully nothing is crazy and everything works fine. We can go inside of the game and actually have a look at this. So I'm going to spawn some enemy. And as you can tell, we get some nice numbers just floating right now. We can actually increase the size if you don't see them. And here they are. And that's pretty much what we've done today. So we created some kind of nice combat text. In the next episode, we're going to start tackling the crit chance and also the crit damage. Alright, so that's going to be pretty much it for this episode, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this or if you learned something, please leave me a like. I always appreciate that. And if you have any question or comment, you can leave them on my Facebook page, which is in the comment section below. So guys, thanks for watching and subscribe for more. I will see you in the next episode.